Presidential clemency. You've probably heard that term a lot lately. It's this power, right? A final say from the White House that can basically override the entire justice system. It sounds almost absolute, but how does it really work? What are its limits? And what's the real-world impact? That's what we're going to break down in this explainer. So, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the single most absolute power a US president has? A lot of people might say, oh, it's being commander-in-chief. And that's a good guess. But, a really strong case can be made for something else. The power of clemency. This is the authority to grant mercy for federal crimes. And it's a tool that has popped up in some of the most significant and, controversial moments in American history. And look, we're not just digging through history books here. This is happening right now. In just the last few years, this power has been given to a really wide range of people. We're talking political allies, high-powered executives convicted of fraud, but also nonviolent drug offenders, and even a huge group of defendants from the January 6th Capitol attack. It's that sheer diversity of who gets clemency that makes this whole topic so complex and, honestly, so important to understand. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with where this power even comes from in the Constitution. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. What's the difference between a pardon and a commutation? After that, we'll look at how recent presidents have actually used this power, what the impact, both human and financial, has been, what the public thinks about all of it, and finally, we'll touch on the big debate about the future of clemency. Okay, so first things first, where does this huge power even come from? Well, it's not some new thing. It is literally baked right into the foundation of the U.S. government. It comes straight from the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2. It says the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons. Now, the thinking behind this, from the framers, was that it was an essential tool for mercy. A way to put a check on the judicial branch, maybe to correct a punishment that was just too harsh, and they put only one real limit on it. You can't use it in cases of impeachment. That's it. So the main thing to get here is that clemency is kind of the big umbrella term for showing mercy. But under that umbrella, there are two very different tools a president can use, and it is super important to know the difference between them. Okay, so let's get into it. Pardon versus commutation. Understanding the difference here is, well, it's everything. It's the key to the entire debate. And for the people who actually receive one, believe me, the distinction is absolutely life-changing. All right, so a pardon, think of that as total official forgiveness for a crime. It usually happens after someone's already served their sentence. A commutation, on the other hand, is different. It just reduces a sentence. It doesn't forgive the crime. It doesn't wipe the conviction off your record. It just lessens the punishment, maybe shortens a prison term for someone who's still locked up. Okay, so now that we know the difference, let's look at how this power has actually been used recently. Because the approaches from the last two administrations, they've been pretty different. Let's start with President Biden. He's used clemency on a really large scale. We're talking nearly 2,500 people. His administration's focus has mostly been on what they call systemic inequities. So they've targeted a lot of nonviolent federal drug offenders, and they've also commuted the sentences for most of the federal inmates on death row, changing them to life in prison. Now, President Trump also used clemency a lot, with over 1,600 acts in his second term alone. The types of recipients were often different, though. They included political allies, people convicted of white-collar crimes, and a blanket pardon for a large group connected to the January 6th Capitol attack. And one of the key things to note about his approach is that a lot of these actions didn't go through that traditional Department of Justice review process. So what is that official review process? Well, it runs through a specific office in the Department of Justice, the Office of the Pardon Attorney. And it's supposed to be really thorough. We're talking background checks, getting input from prosecutors, even hearing from victims. But the demand is just enormous. Right now, there's a backlog of over 18,000 petitions just sitting there. And for all those thousands of people hoping for a second chance through the proper channels, this means justice is delayed. And that's a huge part of why this whole thing is so hotly debated. It's easy to talk about this stuff like it's just some abstract legal move, but it's not. These decisions have profound real-world consequences for individuals, for families, and especially for victims. Let's talk money. A huge financial impact can happen when clemency is granted for things like white-collar crimes. For instance, during the Trump administration, a lot of the clemency actions also waived the requirement to pay court-ordered restitution and fines. The estimated financial hit to victims from those waived payments, it adds up to about $1.3 billion. The human impact, though, that's a lot harder to put a number on, but it's just as powerful. Take a look at this quote. It's from a study about what original crime victims go through when a conviction is overturned. Now, I know, clemency isn't exactly the same as an exoneration, but this quote really captures that devastating emotional whiplash that victims can feel when a decision from the justice system just gets reversed. They can feel totally forgotten, or even like they're being blamed all over again. So, with all this controversy and such high stakes, what does the American public think about it? Well, polling gives us a pretty clear and pretty divided picture. Recent polling from YouGov shows that a clear majority of Americans, that's 58%, think President Trump used his pardon power too much. Compare that to just 17% who thought it was about right. So that really points to a widespread public concern over how this power is being used. And that concern, it translates directly into a desire for reform. Overall, 56% of Americans actually support a constitutional amendment to limit the president's pardon power. But here's where it gets really interesting. Look at the partisan split. You've got 76% of Democrats in favor of limiting the power, but only 34% of Republicans. That just goes to show you how deeply politicized this constitutional power has become. So, all of this brings us to the big central debate about the future of this power. Is it an essential tool for mercy, or is it an outdated power that's just too easy to abuse? Really, the whole debate boils down to two core arguments. On one side, you have people who see clemency as a vital safety valve in the justice system. It's a way to show mercy, to fix sentences that were unfairly long, and to give people a second chance. But on the other side, critics argue that the power is just too absolute and totally ripe for abuse. They point to how it can be used to reward political allies, to go around the entire justice system, and to financially hurt victims by just wiping away the money they were supposed to get. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, right? It gets to the very heart of the balance between executive power and the rule of law. Now that we've seen where it comes from, how it's been used, and the impact it has on real people, should this nearly absolute presidential power be changed? That's a question our country is definitely going to keep grappling with.